All right.
Okay, guys, get going.
Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The topic that we are doing today is Chapter 8, Understanding Complex Organization. This is being done by Colin Ramkisoon and Nigel Richardson. All right. Richie just changed the slide. All right. So we have some slides here with virtually organizations that people would have known and people would not have known. But it simply shows how vast organizations are, not only in our country, but also all over the world. And you have large organizations and small organizations. I change the slide. So these are a continuation of the slides that would identify some of the other companies that a lot of people might know. I change the slide again. Right. Um, One of the things with this course here, leadership, and there's a poem here which would identify something. I don't know if anybody would have heard about a poem called Invictus, and it is very famous because of the person, not only the writer it is related to, but also a person who has been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, and he was a leader of a very large country in the world. Anybody, I'm throwing this out to the class, would anybody have an idea who it is I'm referring to?
The movie was attributed to Mandela.
All right, front of the class, Mark, but thanks very much. And in there was a movie made concerning this when Nelson Mandela was the president. And the name of the movie was in fact Invictus. And this is one of the poem. I think this is the key poem. And people always ask, well, how come he spent so many years incarcerated and still was able to have a clear mind? And I guess this poem, which was written by Mr. Henley in 1875, who wrote it because he refused to have his leg amputated, even though he had they call it by a gangrenous infection in his bone. Right. Even, for want of time, we'll go to the next slide. So everybody would have gotten a chance to see the poem and the key part. I mean, the last part of the poem, I am the master of my fate, I'm the captain of my soul. And it was interesting to see that Nelson Mandela, when he was in power, literally caused the population of South Africa to come together for one simple cause. And that was where South Africa in 1996 had won the World Cup for rugby, and they had hosted it, they won it. And he, as a leader, had essentially unified the whites and the blacks in the country for a short period. And it was truly amazing to see that somebody could actually do something like that. And it shows how determination with leadership skills can accomplish all obstacles, can defeat all obstacles. All right, next slide. Nigel, next slide. All right. So we're going to the overview of the chapter. And we're going to be looking at organizations' existence, their structure, the vision, mission, and core values, and the virtual organizations. And I mean, this is something that we would have known in our organizations. So one of the key things we have is we have groups and we have organizations. And in determining what is a group and what is an organization, we're using the common 7 letters, 7 questions: who, what, when, where, how, and why. And we can see who groups are, some groups is 3+, organizations 20+. And most persons in the MGPS would probably be able to relate to this because we have, in parallel, you may have an organization like the prison service, the police service, maybe the fire service. And then you have groups within the organizations, sections, you may have stations within a division. All these things, a group within a group. So you'll see that in groups, the collection is individuals. In organizations, the collections are groups. And organizations have many participants. That is one of the key things here. Right? Groups, you have ranges close. In organizations, the ranges, it may be close as well as it may be far. One of the things with groups is that it is a simple structure, whereas in organizations, it can be very complex. And we know for sure organizations have many parts. An organization is really a collection of groups of people. And once you think of organizations like that, it's easy to conceptualize what we're talking about. And you may ask now, what do organizations participate in with respect to groups? And there are quite a number of various articles. Change the slide here, Nigel. And one of the attributes for the organizations is that the interaction within organizations are continuous. We can see from our organizations, and there are other organizations which may not be within our purview, but nevertheless, they would have the same basis with respect to the interactions. And remember, one of the main things we did in organizational behavior and business is networking. So you have a certain level of that. Proximity to participants. Well, this one was in a case in a particular way. And with the advent of COVID-19, sections that may have had a virtual organization were forced to catapult and go a little further into developing the proximity rule and have virtual organizations on a larger scale. So, I mean, this is a perfect example where everything was just crawling and literally it had to jumpstart and go a particular way, or else you would have collapse of organizations. And we ourselves, we would have seen that in some of the organizations where I remember where there would have been a lot of meetings, and the meetings required persons to use the computers and whatever software to have the meetings. So the person-to-person meetings, it would have been there. They would have had all the safety protocols, but now the transition is there. We see organizations as complex in their structures. And when you really think about it, well, from the organization, the two main organizations that we have, we would have seen that from the org chart that we are in fact complex. And even the chart itself over the period of years, especially like the TTPS, you would have seen where the structures were a particular way. And then with the introduction of maybe replacement heads or introduction of new heads, supervisory heads, the whole org structure would have changed altogether. And you would have seen the organization now enlightening all members as to what the org chart was, how it is, and what were the changes. So these things are very dynamic at times. And based on that, you will definitely see many layers and departments within the structure and who would be the leader within the particular section and departments and so forth. Now, the thing about it is organizations exist to accomplish a specific purpose. We have all been participants and at some time had some leadership skills to address within our organization. And one has to ask ourselves, why do organizations exist? And the nice thing with the two organizations that we specifically are dealing with within our ambit here, it would have had the historical aspect within the creation of both the prison service and the police service. So that is the nice thing with our organizations. There may be other organizations where they would have to, I don't know, create something there to give a historical aspect. You know, like how Angostura would have been formed. A perfect example is that when you go to the display room, they would have a brief history within it. So most organizations definitely share some history, why they exist, and what it is that they have to do. All right, Nigel, next slide, please. So we can agree on one thing. Organizations are complex in their structure. And organizations are also systems. Based on Tubbs 1984, a system is defined as an environment in which each interaction between members produce outcomes that affect each individual and subsequent interactions and outcomes. So we're seeing a lot of interaction. We're seeing a lot of results based on the interaction, based on Tubbs. And the Kelly 1994 introduced something called the 9 laws of God. And in where he described the organizing principles within the system as diverse as a biological evolution and simplicity. So these laws apply to organizations as systems. These qualities relate closely to the new paradigm material that was covered in earlier. I think that would have been in chapter 2 with respect to organizational life. And here we have a summation, next slide, of the organization systems, the 9 laws of, and it covers all the points there. A very nice. The distributed being, essence of the organization, existing in all its connected members. Control from the bottom up. That is empowering members at all levels of the organization. Cultivate increasing returns. You're focusing on your organization, on what your organization does well and does even better. Grow by chunking. Well, this one, whilst certain organizations grow one piece at a time, but in bunches. The thing about it is, our organization focuses not on profits or other things, but nevertheless, we would have had a certain level of growth. However, our organization, for example, the TTPS, they would have had growth with respect to, in our case, reduction on our statistics. And we have seen over the years the annual statistics of certain things going up as well as certain things going down. And nevertheless, we would have challenges and we would have had statistics gains, actual percentages, and these were the markings that the organization would have used to base itself as to where it is that they're going and what were the shortfalls of the organization. Maximizing the fringes. Honor your creative members and their ideas, even if they're really out there. And I mean, one of the things we have to recognize in this organizations, especially when you have meetings, as some seniors, I remember a senior saying, he said that no question is a dumb question. So at the end of the day, if it is somebody might have an idea, is either they have a generalized picture of where the organization is going, or they may be slightly off, or it is that they may have a different perspective from what everybody was seeing and create light into what it is that was being addressed. And it happens. Sometimes you may ask a question, you might see that, and somebody answer, and it's only when you look at the person's perspective, then it probably, it realizes that this is something that could have been tackled from another point. So these are one of the key areas with maximizing differences. Honoring your errors. Organizations recognize that with trial and errors, learning happens. And that happens across the board with all organizations. There are errors. The main thing is to learn from your errors and not continuously do the errors on a continuous basis. We have the pursue no opta. There's no one right answer to complex problems. There are only partial solutions. Seek persistent disequilibrium. Change itself. And most organizations, you will always see some level of change that happens within the organization. So once an organization more or less has the 9 laws of God within their system there, the organization more or less would be progressing forward. Next slide, Nigel. Organizational leadership. We had asked previously, what are organizations and why do they exist? And one of the main things that an organization must have is some level of leadership. It may be middle management, it may be upper management, but nevertheless, there must be some level of it. And leadership exists for one reason. It is to help an organization accomplish its stated purpose. The purpose, as we know, may shift over time. So in other words, once the purpose is there, even though it may be shifting, the duty now of leadership is to ensure that the organization, which would be the members of the organization, go in the particular direction, in the particular shift that the organization is going. So in other words, leadership keeps everything on track to pursue its mission. And that's a nice word there, mission. And later on, as we saw in the summary, we're going to be focusing on the vision and the mission of the organization in a short while. So once you maintain the focus of the mission, leadership helps the organization to be sustainable and for the organization to exist over the long term. And this is definitely a critical function of leadership. Now, the leadership model here is the relational leadership model, which provides a usable framework from which leaders can work to accomplish an organization's purpose. And here are the key words of this model. You have to be inclusive. You have to be empowering. You have to be ethical, powerful words, process oriented, whilst helping all the organization members be purposeful and work towards positive purposes. Leaders and members can work together. So we see as much as leaders sometimes get bad rapport, generally, once you maintain and you use all these keywords here, this is what drives everybody within the proper direction that the organization has to go in. Next slide, please. Nigel, next slide.
This is it.
Nigel? Right, organizational structure. So, whilst we would have remembered that Max Weber in 1924, 1947, he would have talked about how organizations, the hierarchical structure of organization. We have done that, I think, with Mr. Blackman. And he talked about the bureaucratic model of organizations with the hierarchical structure, division of labor, and etc. You had the power, the authority, and everything. But the thing about it is, the traditional system, members had little power and authority or responsibility. And in layman's terms, you were almost like a pawn in a chess game. You're just there, little input. You're just, if the game was to just move forward, you just move forward. And that was, and somewhere down the line, there was a call for organizations to be collaborative, according to Berry 2004, and compassionate, according to Hills and Stevens 2003, empathic, Lee and Greer 2003, instead of the old command and control functions. And lo and behold, the structure that we would have known, change the slide in, Nigel, let me just see the full structure. Right, this is the traditional organizational structure that all persons would have seen, I mean, within like the government service of the country, most public sectors, even the original hierarchy of the TTPS would have been something like this. And yet you have newer systems. You have alternative systems like the inverted organizational structure. And this one here, if I'm not mistaken correctly, companies like Toyota would adopt a system similar to this, where their participants or members are the key persons that they focus on. And based on that, they may have the president, but nevertheless, they have a lot of input from the members, which is why, according to JP Power, I think, Toyota vehicles have one of the highest, not only safety ratings, but you're looking at quality ratings compared to other models in the world. And we're talking even high-end vehicles or the Mercedes-Benz. Because of this input, they are able to address all flaws within the area, improve areas within their belt to find out what is working, what needs to improve, what it is that the members think, and review everything and implement. So inverted organization structure does have its benefits, and it is being seen as working based on the corporation of Toyota. All right, next slide, please. Now, this one is an interesting one. This is the web structure. And according to Allen, 1990, Helgensen, 1995, the web is defined both by its pattern, similar to a spider's web, and by the idea that the shape and pattern of the web will vary over time. And this was very interesting when I read it. New members, because of the design, new members easily connect to the structure at its outer edges, where the web is looser and more permeable. The structure works well in an environment filled with change, as the pattern is continuously being built up, stretched, altered, modified, and transformed. And one key thing with the web structure here is that by looking at the web structure, all layers are interconnected with the common purpose. So you have networking across this whole structure here. So the important processes that define webs, we're looking at communication, as we said just now, there is open and happens across all levels. Thinking of what to do and actually doing it is not separated because information and expertise are distributed. It goes back to communication again. The strands, when you look at the strands of the web, it distributes the power across the network. So you have creative ideas, and the creative ideas flow throughout. And the authority now could follow and implement. Reorganization is easy as the web can tighten across its center or become looser. So there's less emphasis on what position or who holds how much power. So it is a balanced power across this web. The strands radiate from the leader, providing points of connection to the outside environment and allow new members to latch onto the organization. And because finally, because the web organization constantly reinvents itself through a process of trial and error, so that would have gone back to the 9 laws, process that are successful continue and strengthen the entire web, whereas those that are not successful, change into something new. The change is easily accomplished because of the communication, which is the first part of the concept of the web, and decision making, the distribution of the decision making also across the web. So one of the things that we have to remember about these structures, and it is good to remember this, the structure of what we've seen here is not the organization. The organization is the membership, the people who have come together for a certain purpose. The structure was simply a format created so that the membership now could achieve the purposes for which the organization was developed. And that is a critical thing to remember concerning the structures that we would have seen there. So organizations also exist to connect people to each other. When the structure ceases to do either of these things, it has to change. So you'd see there that there must always be some level of communication. And one of the things is that another thing to remember, leaders must depend on others to accomplish anything. And like everything else, once you have a certain level of leadership responsibilities, duties, and we have seen it in the organization, where duties would be delegated amongst the subordinates. You as a leader now, whilst delegating, would have guidelines based on the organization, and also based on your aspect of your human resource as to how the delegation is to be implemented. All right, next slide, please. So we have a very interesting subheading here, the organization mission, vision, and core values. I'm just throwing this out. Does anybody in the class remember what the vision is in their respective organization? Nobody? All right. Let me just throw out one here for the TTPS. And the vision of the TTPS is to make every place in Trinidad and Tobago safe. Simple and straightforward. And the mission for the TTPS, in partnership with the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, we provide for safe and secure communities and other places through professional policing, focused leadership, and consistent high-quality service. Now, one of the things that an organization may have, other than that, you may have departments now within the organization creating their own core vision and mission. And I'll give you an example of one. The Police Academy, which is a subset of the TTPS, has a vision. And their vision is to be the Academy of Excellence in Law Enforcement, Education, and Training locally and regionally. The mission of the Police Academy, in partnership with local, regional, and international stakeholders, we shall produce competent professional law enforcement personnel through the delivery of high-quality education and training to meet the safety and security demands of all persons in keeping with international best practices. So you have here where you may have your mission, your vision, your core values, and yet you may have your departments. Because of the nature of the department, they may also create the core values. And I mean, a perfect example here too is the software that we are using right now in class. It is from Google. Google was created, and it is one of the companies that has a very high standard with respect to their mission statement. Although a lot of people might debate that now because of what is happening with Apple. And speaking of Apple, Apple, as you all would have remembered, Apple was the first company to innovate phones and integrate the first smartphone, which was released about 12 years ago. That was the iPhone 1. And lo again, Apple is also creating news again because of the software where companies like Google and Facebook may end up losing funds because Apple, which has focused on the core values and the interests of all its customers, has required that all these companies mandate that whenever they collect data from persons must know that they're collecting it. And if it is specifically for third-party companies, they may also know about that. So that is a very interesting thing that companies are doing here. And it is going to cause some dynamic changes in everything we do with the software that we're using, with these other software like Facebook, Messengers, and everything. So going back to the vision of an organization, according to Coase and Posner, 1995, the vision that we had mentioned just now there, a vision is an ideal or unique image of the future Albert 1994 terms it an image of what people of the enterprise aspire for it to be or become. And I mean, the vision is straightforward. When you heard what the vision is for the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, I mean, the prison service would have their vision and the mission also. And it is straightforward. This is what we have to do. Now, one of the things, getting the members of your organization to share the vision can be very challenging. But unless it is shared and owned by the members, nothing of significance will ever happen. One of an example of this is where past commissioner, he had envisioned where whenever there would be meetings, he made the request that all heads, they must have a prayer for enforcement officers, so that before all the meetings would start, they would have it. It was a very nice vision that he wanted. He motivated persons. There were meetings that started off, and like everything else, it started. But unless, like it said, if it is not shared and owned by the members, and without the leadership propelling it, it would not materialize. And most meetings after a couple of months, normal meeting, you come to the meeting, people say whatever they say, and then after that, that's it. No prayers, no nothing, no everything. So some of the ideas are good, but these are the things that happen sometimes. Right. Now, according to Collins and Forrest 1994, the core values, the organization's essential and enduring tenets, a small set of general guiding principles, not to be confused with specific cultural or operating practices, not to be compromised for financial gain or short-term expediency. The core values they're talking about. And going back to the prayers that the previous commissioner would have envisioned. And I think one of the things that the idea I think you had to take into consideration is that a perfect example would have been whenever there were interfaith services that bits of the protective services would attend. You would notice that all the religious heads would be in that. So you're looking at all persons, and I think the commissioner, I think maybe what would have had a problem with having a service prayer was the mere fact that the denomination of the Christians would have been focused on, whereas if you had something like this, you would have needed to include all the other denominations, just like an interfaith service, for it to have meaning and merit for all persons. And this is an example where you see if persons don't buy into the vision, this is what happens. So simple as it is there, it shows how other areas within an organization can fall or collapse because of the members not buying into the ideology of the organization. All right, we have organizational culture. And that's the interesting thing with this culture. According to James Cass, 1986, he said that culture has no boundary. And for this reason, it can be said that where society is defined by its boundaries, a culture is defined by its horizon. And Shine 2004 had proposed that there were 3 different levels. And we're talking about the structures and processes of the organization, the espoused belief and values of the organization to make up the next level. And these are the strategies, goals, and philosophies that the organization claims it embraces. At the final, deepest level are the underlying assumptions. So you have the beliefs, the perceptions, the thoughts, and the feelings that are assumed to be true by members of the organization. And because the organization is made up of members, it is more or less human nature. You look at beliefs, you look at human perception, human thoughts, human feelings. These what drives the values of humans, whether we are in an organization or not. So one of the key things that a leader has to do, he has to manage culture. And I mean, look at the powerful words there, beliefs, perception, thoughts. Deal and Kennedy, 1982, they offered a different framework. They stressed the organization's values, their heroes, the rites and rituals, and communications network. Values are very important because they provide the core of the organization and a guide for the behavior of the members. You have heroes, ordinary individuals who are heroic in their actions, are critical because they make success more powerful to achieve. They provide role models, symbolize the organization to outsiders, preserve what makes the organization special. I mean, I wouldn't say that Mr. Alexander, our superintendent, is a hero, but nevertheless, it kind of shows, I'm trying to show where once people look at those informative shows like Beyond the Tape, they would be seeing a person like Superintendent Alexander on a daily basis. And essentially, they would have his character and they would symbolize him as a role model indirectly based on what he does and what he says on those shows and whatever other interaction he has with the public there. So he himself, he may not be a hero per se by doing something, but nevertheless, he has the heroic qualities based on what he is doing there, based on people's perception. So rites and rituals. One of the things that the protective services has, and I mean, a perfect example is what is coming up in the US, and we have it also in our country, is Memorial Day. Memorial Day, protective services must represent himself. Memorial Day is always guarded for persons who would have served during the 2 world wars, however, directly or indirectly. So whilst it is a right and ritual for us, maybe in the prisons and the police service, it is even greater and more important for persons who are directly in the military. For example, the regiment, the defense force, coast guard, all those ambits that would have actually played an integral role within the world wars. Right. So the nice thing with the communications network, we're going right back to communications here again, where how information is gathered, information is disseminated, information could be both formally and informally. And this depends on the people, not the paper. The Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, what a lot of people would have learned from watching some of the shows like Beyond the Tape. They would have relayed information as to how persons submit information to the organization, how we process it, and they would always have various arms and shouldn't say arms, but various medium by which information can be sent to the organization. I mean, the present commissioner, look, he initiated the use of social media technology even greater by the use of things like WhatsApp numbers for communicating with the public. So he would have gone a step further into developing what the values and the forward drive of our organization would be into the future. It is a small step, but nevertheless, it is still a step. And only time will tell based on what he does there and maybe the use of future technology that may come about based on everything that is happening in the world right now. And we may see a different level of communication coming on. So we're seeing something here. Now, Deal and Kennedy described various characters, 1982, described various characters within the organization and how they outline, how they contribute to the communications network. So some of these were very quite interesting because it reflects their perception of what is happening within the organization. You have the persons who represent the priests. So the priests see themselves as guarding the values of the organization culture. Another of their role is to keep the membership of the organization together. And truly that was really interesting because I mean, look at that. You have the priests within the organization, and when you parallel it to priests within maybe the church or whatever denomination, and you see the certain similarities. Of course, we have the others here. They are the whisperers who work behind the scenes and have power because of their close connection to the leadership of the organization. Of course, the whisperers would have different terminologies in different organizations. Anybody in class would be willing to volunteer what term is sometimes used to replace whisperers? Anybody? Mr. Sudin? Mr. Lu?
News carriers.
Oh, thank you, Bobby.
Marco.
Oh boy, look at that. So we see that, and yet, nevertheless, well, and it is seen here that organizations have the the terminology used here is whispers. And then you have another group here called the gossips. They provide detailed information of what is currently happening within the organization. Sometimes it is correct, and sometimes they are not. And I think we can see here where this is inherently true because on a broader term, we have nationally within the country, you have persons with using all these social networks, and they are sending information, and sometimes only upon checking and verification, you may see that sometimes the information is totally false or very old. But nevertheless, people just, as they get them, they gossip, they do like the gossipers, and they just run with the information. Sometimes it might be correct, but at times they are not. And you have the other group here. This is the administrative support. The sources can tell members what is really going on in the organization because the administrative support are the ones who have access to important information. So just as how we have whisperers, there are also spies, and I mean spies are spies. Spies are loyal to the leaders of the organization and provide information to them about what is happening. And that is an inherent part of human nature. Sometimes when there's a transition from one leadership to the next, you actually see that. So sometimes when new leadership takes place, there's always some level of massive shuffling sometimes. And I mean, we see it with the government too when there are changes within the administration because of these things. So just as how there are inherent spies within organizations, other larger organizations and bodies would definitely have it. And then finally, um, this word here, very famous. I think Winston Gypsy Peters would have sang something concerning this a couple of years ago, and it is the cabal, the cabals. And the cabals are the group of two or more persons whose main purpose in joining together is to advance themselves within the organization. And it's very interesting to notice that their alliance is often kept secret. Imagine that. That is the definition of the cabal. Now, Ballman and Deal, 2003, they had a different view of organizations, and they used the concept of the four frames of organization. So you looked at the structural, the human resource, the political, and the symbolic. So structural frame focuses on the formal processes like the organized, like the org charts, the roles, and the job descriptions. I mean, that is important because um, I think within the organization of the TTPS, there have been organizational charts, roles, and job descriptions. And if memory serves me correctly, the whilst persons would have had job descriptions, it was only in 2001 that there was an actual revamp of job descriptions within the TTPS, and they formulated the complete job description across the whole rank from the commissioner to the constable within the organization. And that was a great step because I mean the organization would have had it. It would have been almost like a scattered constitution. And for reasons of reorganization, the leaders found it necessary to put things in place, have everything in a particular way, and start structuring. So the police service started that in 2001, officially, having a mass from all the different areas that were scattered and compiling it to one large departmental internal memorandum. So we're looking at the human resource now. The human resource frame emphasizes the people in the organization, their feelings and their motivations. And at the end of the day, like we would have seen before, and I'm going back to the same thing with the prayers. If it is that people's feelings is that if I am not part of that religious organization, yet I am told to partake in it, what level of motivation would that be pushing on the workers, the members of the organization? What would be their feeling based on that? So that is a small example of how, whilst you may have a frame, all persons have to come in into it, as well as you need to have inputs from all persons. So the political frame operates from the perspective that there will always be a scarcity of resources. So organizations are inevitably in conflict with each other and must operate in such a way, such as forming coalitions that will enable them to gain more. And the funny thing about it is that um, You know, going back to the organization here, the TTPS, where when a couple years ago, when the everything was, I should say, the money was running the country, price, the oil was $100, whatever, and everything like that. Sections would have been given immense finances to address areas, whatever. But sometimes what happens is that the visions in the departments, sometimes they sort of forget some of the key areas. I'll give you a perfect example of this. The police defensive driving unit over the years have submitted requests to have a larger compound, to have um, proper areas, to have supervisory driving. And when I say supervisory driving, normally if somebody is learning to drive, they would be within a compound. And anybody who is a driver, they would know you have to do your L turn, your three-way turn, your reverse, whatever, this and that. But it is within a control area. Then you have your actual driving within the areas, the normal roadways and everything. And a perfect example was this where the documentations would have been sent to the numerous heads within the uh, the organization, and it had reached to the point where even the minister, with respect to who does with the disperse of government lands and everything, it had reached. And we're talking about, if memory serves me correctly, we're looking at a 7-year time frame, and still nothing to this date, nothing has been done. Even though the correspondence and everything would have been sent during the period when, as they say, there were no scarcity of resources. But nevertheless, you see the overall organization, these things do happen. And well, now that there's a scarcity of resources, definitely there would there would be no forward movement with respect to the development of that section within that organization. So it simply shows how you look at things at times, and it happens because you remember the drive is sometimes there are other areas that need to focus on, and sometimes it doesn't become a priority. And as I say, the political frame, whenever it changes, there are certain changes, and it happens. So the symbolic frame focuses on ceremonies. And just like how the other theorists would have pointed out, the symbolic framework within our organization would be Memorial Day. And it is symbolic. It is symbolic because of the fact that what happened years ago. And even self, the interesting thing about it is that even looking at the media sometimes, one would see, I don't know if we have anybody right now, but I think there were actually, I think it's about 3 persons I could remember last year or year before that had actually served in World War II that was still alive. So, I mean, it's only when these things are looked upon that you actually see these are what you call the unsung heroes within society that people just simply take for granted. Oh, it is, but I mean, that is human nature. But nevertheless, it is nice to know that these things um, do exist. And once people are appreciative and the knowledge is shown to them about what is the basis of having these symbolic frames and the ceremonies and the stories, I guess that is the main thing that counts. Hosford, 2003. He proposed that people differ in 5 broad dimensions. And his, his thing, he looked at individualism, how much individual work is emphasized over collective action, masculinity. Well, I mean, they haven't changed that word yet, but somewhere down the line, because of the varying colors of the rainbow, somewhere along the line, this may eventually change and may end up using a different word. The degree to which traditional male values are embraced over traditional female values. So, like I said, somewhere down the line, there may be definitely some changes with respect to this to the work by Mr. Hosford. There's also the uncertainty avoidance index, which refers to the degree to which ambiguity and uncertainty are tolerated. And like everything else, it is almost like in from a financial aspect, it's the parallel. You cannot have a business with excessive credit before your business go bust. So likewise, just like your organization, your uncertainty avoidance index, it must be a limited. There's also the long-term orientation, or how much a long-term perspective is favored over a short-term view. And when you consider Hosford's dimension, it can help us definitely in our own organization. And it helps us because remember, people have different beliefs and preferences of how work should be done. So, I mean, I'll give you a simple one. Just looking at the masculinity. If somebody, based on his religious belief, he may be in the organization and he may have issues with a female supervisor giving him instructions. And these are these, it may sound simple, but these are the sort of things that you have to look at when you have leadership in an organization and how people within the organization differ. So one thing with our organization, we have a history of being hierarchical. So that is the nature of how our organization is formed. And whilst our organization would have long-term and short-term goals, we leave it to the leaders of the organization to decide how everything goes, because one of the nice things with the TTPS, are referring to them again, is that they would always have a rollout every 3 years showing where we are, where we need to be, and how we're going. So that is a perfect example of how you may have long term and showing in a short term how far you would have reached, what would have been your challenges, what would have been the method to correct the challenges, and how these things would have progressed. It should be noted that in Stacy 1992, strongly shared cultures inevitably block new learning and cut down on the variety of perspectives brought to bear on an issue. In other words, the more norms we strongly share, the more we resist changing them. And this brings to mind a couple of years ago when some professors came from Penn State University that was brought by the Trinidad and Tobago government to sort of develop the whole structure of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. And one of the books that the lecturers would have given the middle managers dealing. The name of the book was The 1 Minute Manager. And the key thing that they talk about there, you see the part where humans are resistant to change, that is inherently human nature. And what the book focused on as middle managers within the organization is that if you are to make change, you need to have it just like how we have the rolling out of the organization, the TTPS itself, where you have your long-term plans and you have it rolled out in increments of every 3 years as a short term to show then how far your long term is, but over the short period, incremental changes. And that is the focus with because of human nature. You can make changes, but the changes, maybe as how they say, in layman's terms, when you have to climb up a stairs, you don't ever reach to the top. You have to make it there one step at a time. Sometimes you might slip and go down, but nevertheless, one step at a time, and at the end, then you'll reach the top of the stairs. So, cultures is a perfect example of how humans are and what we need to do as managers, middle managers, in addressing simple things like that. And it all goes back to communication. It all goes back to being the individual, the members of the organization. So even self, we have the different theories here. We can also see a comparative with all the other theories. Even self, they may have used different wording, but nevertheless, it is sharing some similarity or the intention of what they want to do. They must have some level of networking. They must have the core values of the humans. Even self, you're looking at the culture, it also revolves back. And I guess the web hierarchy structure, the web structure of the cult of the organization, even self it might be the organization, but nevertheless, these ideas where everything is interconnected, it shares some level of importance here. All right, the next slide is the next topic is organizational network. And networking, as we know, is very important. And according to Watts 2003 and Barbasi, the importance of networks is very important. Networks even made it into the culture. People play the game 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. So, imagine you have a game about linking one actor to the next. And that was actually a game. It was very interesting. Um, Stamps 1993 defined networks as where disparate groups of people and groups link to work together based on common purpose. One of the things that organizational behavior would have focused on is networking. And just as how people are interconnected, and just as how Watts would have focused on a game, on somewhere showing links from one thing to the next, um, it is inherently clear. We may see it all the time and not know it. And looking at the movies here, because of the internet, you may have like Will Smith, persons would have known Will Smith in the movie Men in Black. And then you would have a link like Tommy Lee Jones would have also been in Men in Black. And because of the internet, you'd have probably linked now to different movies that Tommy Lee Jones would have been. And for example, I remember in the 80s, I remember watching a movie called The Park Is Mine. I mean, it was a nice picture and everything years ago. Only to realize that that was a movie starring Tommy Lee Jones. So networks here, and I mean, you're seeing how there are links in the networks. And just as how you might be looking at a movie and you say, look, let me just look and see what other movie this actor was in to see what I may have seen or what I may not have seen. Parallel this in an organization. So you have persons who are participants in the organization and the other persons who are outside the organization. But the key thing there to focus on is the link, because it's the link, the group link is what causes the common purpose to be conceptualized and to come about, the working together. So definitely networking is important. Networking, you address specific issues. You can have meetings. You can have, I mean, we're looking at networking here now, where you have network meetings with different heads. So you're seeing a lot of changes here based on what it is that we would have conceptualized meeting as. And then look at the development now, where meetings are progressing into a different level. To something, well, I should say because of what is happening in the world right now. We are having different things, and even though you have, instead of having the normal station meetings where you have the the legal representatives, the constituents, the constituency representatives, the different arms of persons in a meeting. You actually have these online meetings now, where just like how we would have a Google Meet here, they would have a meet there talking about various challenges within going together, like within a station district, whatever problems they may have, and they're trying to address. So definitely we're seeing how the networking is progressing. And like again, we going back to how the organizations, the network was with respect to the virtual network, and look at how even self you have organization network here now. You have to a greater extent virtualization, even in simple things like organizational network. Um, next topic here is the life cycles of organizations. And I would like to introduce my good friend, Nigel Richardson, to see if he can shed some light onto the class here concerning this topic and continuing with the lecture. Nigel, can you come in there now?
Thank you, Colin. Good day, class. Good day, Mr. Bisu, Lady McIntyre. As we go forward, earlier we had spoken of the fact that organizations are created to achieve specific purposes. So, therefore, there's a both on there is an end to some organizations. Generally, it is accepted that once the specific purpose that the organization was created to achieve has been achieved, the organization ceases to be relevant and can cease to operate. This happens with short-term organizations such as ones that may have been formed, let's say, in a university during a particular class's course of study, right? Like some sports club or something like that. At the end of the course of study, the organization naturally is dissolved. An organization might have been developed due to as a response to some natural disaster, for example, Hurricane Katrina, eruption of a volcano, etc. after that organization has served its purpose, it usually is dissolved. But however, also there were organizations that were brought into being without the consideration for their being dissolved, but due to failure, the organization ends up being wound up. Like, for instance, some businesses, right? We have a quote attributed to one Gary Hamel that says, "Whatever you shoot is dead for a while before it starts to stink." The same goes for strategies. How many organizations carry this dead thing around with them, unaware of its irrelevancy until it is too late? So sometimes organizations end up with this happening to them. They adopt strategies that probably won't work out in the long term, and by the time they realize that, it is too late and the organization has suffered failure and it goes the way we don't know. For instance, large businesses such as Pan American Airlines, which was an iconic airline of the past that shocked everyone when it failed. However, we are experiencing and are dealing with public sector organizations, which have been, like, for instance, the police and the prison service had been instituted to achieve specific purposes with no plan to close them down at any point in the future. Even if they patently happen to feel that in their mission, we still don't expect that any state government will get up one morning and close their police or their prison service. Now, what we have during their life cycle, we attempt to adjust the operations of these organizations and adapt them to the present time so that they can move into the future and achieve sustainability. If we look at this picture we have up, you could see a sort of difference in what policing might have looked like in some days gone by to what is representative of it now, right? What we see is a change having been made in the organization, right, to bring it more in line with the present day, in an attempt to keep the organization fresh, viable, and relevant to the society it is expected to serve. Now, again, the ability to successfully adapt to change is what ensures survivability of the organization. There's this thing called generativity, which speaks to the organization continuing to bring forward fresh persons with fresh ideas, and more importantly, even though these organizations, public sector organizations don't look for fresh ideas, but the generativity would more refer to the organizations bringing persons with fresh energy to bear in the operations organization. Inclusivity and multicultural development speaks for itself. It means the organization attempts to reach out and reflect the nature of the society around it, especially in this country. We have what we consider a more cosmopolitan society. So the organization seeks to represent that, right? This also is best facilitated under the relational leadership model, which we have covered in great detail, right, and continue to cover in this class, where, again, taken from the relational leadership model, the organization attempts to be inclusive in its membership and empowering also to the persons making up the membership. All right. An important aspect of the structure of organizations is called virtuality, right, which is being brought about by the impact of technology, especially the present world revolution in information technology and communications. So this allows an organization to be run from, let's say, a central location, and allows policy and information, etc., to be distributed to persons who are separated widely geographically from the administrative center of the organization. Now, with the extent of this present pandemic, you see organizations moving toward using more of that technology to attempt to manage the organizational structure, right, and decentralizing management even further with the use of telecommunications. The use of 5G technology will also allow greater use of video, especially video technology, and transmissions of SIM to memberships that are located far and wide from the center of the organization. So that plays a part. Also, this use of virtual technology is best employed by organizations that employ what you would call new paradigm leadership. Again, going back to the relational leadership model. We know that the organizations we are part of were not founded on the structure of the use of new paradigm leadership or the relational leadership models. But what you would find is that persons in leadership roles would find that as they go forward in time, that using such practices would allow them greater effectiveness in their management roles in these organizations. So you'll find informally that some sectors of management, some will take longer to catch on than others, but generally you would find that informally this new paradigm leadership would be creeping in to the organization and replacing the more conventional approach, which operated by the rigid hierarchical structure. Going forward, we have some a quote by Avolio and Kahai 2003 that said that at its core, leadership is about the development of relationships. Whether connected via information technology or not, leaders have to build relationships in order to lead effectively. So even though the organization doesn't adopt this as a specific policy, persons would find that in leadership roles that their effectiveness is best attained by developing relationships with subordinates and building effective relationships among the various groups that make up the organization provides better results. So you'll find that, again, as I said, this type of leadership will be creeping in, even though it's not officially sanctioned in the organization. You'll find that a lot of little groups are created in the organization where persons end up networking with each other informally to get their jobs done. So this is something that is basically what we would look at as being the wave of the future in terms of helping an organization to achieve greater sustainability going forward and to allow the organization to get closer toward achieving its goals. Even, as I said, even though the organizations that we speak of today are not running the risk of being shut down because, or coming to the end of their life cycle because of a lack of effectiveness. What you would find is that the organizations could become less and less relevant in the society and then they become replaced by parallel organizations. And so much so, we have the extreme example of a place like, let's say, Somalia, where these organizations of this nature became less and less relevant to the society until, being that these are the organizations that support, act as a support structure to a formal government, the country ended up without a governmental structure, far less to think about police and prisons, etc., etc. And we even saw that right next door in South America. You see there are certain states that came quite close to the state of anarchy, where the organizations became less and less relevant to the society, only because of some of these self-same issues in their life cycle, lack of development, lack of generativity, a lack of sustainability. And even though the state didn't formally close the organizations got to the point where they seem to be of no use in the society, allowing parallel organizations. You see that still happening in Mexico and Brazil. I wouldn't speak about Venezuela because the whole state has failed now. So this, again, the leadership of the organization is of paramount importance. The nature of the leadership is of paramount importance as we go forward. So I would close here and summarize the chapter as having examined what was the nature and purpose of our organization. We looked at what factors create successful organizations, and also what factors contribute to what organizations not being successful. We looked at how an organization operates in its existence, the changing organizational structures. We looked at where the Japanese found it expedient to change their organizational structures, because in their organizations that were trying to command the world markets and to compete. And you find in the modern world now that the first world, other companies are trying to follow the example of the Japanese, because it proved to be quite successful. They're inverting their organizational structure and taking cues from the persons that traditionally would have been at the bottom of the pile. But they are the people who operate in the area where everything is taking place, where the rubber meets the road, and all the information starts there. Right? We look at organizational sustainability. Right? What factors affect the sustainability of our organization? The vision, mission, and core values, which is extremely important, because again, with the relational leadership model, it can be emphasized enough the role that the ethical conduct of the leader plays in getting the respect of the followers. Because it doesn't make sense that a leader, that the followers have no confidence in your behavior, especially in your ability to act fairly toward them. So the other the empowerment and those things are quite important, but for the leader to act ethically is of paramount importance. Right? Because people really don't tend not to follow persons or believe in persons that, again, they don't have respect for. And ethics is something, your leadership ethics is something that, goes a very long way toward creating confidence in the membership. Right? Proper ethics is something that hardly anyone in the world could complain about. Virtual organizations, again, this speaks to organizations that have a distributed management structure, and they use telecommunications. In the past, it would have been the telephone. Now there's the internet, so there you have voice, you have visual telecommunications. So again, as you go forward, you will be seeing more use of these tools, and organizations operating a lot more on the virtual plane. The relational leadership model, again, we can continue to underscore the importance of using that leadership model to motivate membership, so they could continue bringing energy into the organization. Now, Robert's Rule of Order, which spoke about excitement, being included in the organization. In these organizations, that excitement, yes, is a motivator. It stops persons from becoming inured to the running of the organization and complacent. It kind of helps prevent complacency, but there is such a thing as too much of it, and sometimes in these types of organizations, we appreciate when there is a lack of excitement. Because stability is of paramount importance in these associations, so we take that with a grain of salt. So, gentlemen, I'd like to thank Mr. Bisu and the class for your undivided attention and your patience today, and Ms. McIntyre also. And this concludes our presentation of complex organizations. Thank you.
All right, are there any questions? Okay, if not, I'm going to pause the recording.